whereby someone says, what do I want out of this experience of smoking this joint? Why am I doing this? What do I hope to achieve out of it? And once you understand and define those parameters for yourself, then you can then identify what the right ways to maximize the benefits of that experience will be and also reduce the harm.
It is very dangerous. The THCP is 35 times stronger than normal THC.
For me working here, I've been using cannabis for a long time, and this is like a dream job, if you could say.
Yeah.
It's Reefer Madness, the podcast, with Trevor and Kirk.
Welcome back to Reefer Madness, the podcast. I'm Renee. I'm back here in the studio. This is part 2 of an interview Trevor did with Daniel Baer, who's a cannabis expert, talking about harm reduction. And so why don't we get right into it? Here's Trevor with Daniel Baer.
And how about just plain taxation? The thing we hear complaints about is just not every just pot shot or, massive grow up thought they were going to get rich. All the provinces seem to have thought they were going to get rich, and I suppose the federal government too, off of cannabis. And the amount of tax, for every, I forget what the percentage is anymore, but it's for every dollar you spend on cannabis, an inordinate large amount of that goes just to pay taxes. Like if you cut the taxes in half, many stores and producers would suddenly become much more profitable. Have we hit the right balance? Is that still a work in progress? Sorry, governments. It seems like an easy fix to just reduce those taxes a bit.
Yeah, and that's the main argument I hear in talking with folks in industry is that it's time to reduce the excise tax in particular, although they'd like to see a more widespread than just the excise tax. I know there's been discussions around changes about province by province tax stamps. It's a really tough question there. I can see both sides of this. On the one hand, tying it to the dollar per gram minimum for the excise tax, it failed to account for how prices would drop after legalization, which is something that is held true in every U.S. state and every other jurisdiction that's legalized. And, Colorado was the sort of primary example, and I know the task force went to Colorado when they were looking at legalization. Colorado experienced significant price drops in cannabis within the first 2 years of legalization, not dissimilar to how Canada has seen continued price drops. Legalization, we were looking at like $12 a gram, and now we're at like $4. That's not surprising. And so that the percentage of that cost that is now going to tax has just continued to increase. And so tying or reducing the minimum from $1 per gram might be a possible way to improve the financial stability of the market. And we do need that, right? We need a stable cannabis market. And if we're going with a commercialized capitalist approach to cannabis, then you need to have some stability there for the people who are in that industry if you don't want us to slide back into people going to the illicit market. And we've been very successful at capturing people from the illicit market, but if the local store doesn't and no longer exists, if the prices can't continue to compete with the illicit market, then people might not stick around with that. They do like the quality of the product, although we know that there is some THC inflation, and we know that there are some issues in production sometimes. But thankfully, we've been pretty stable on ensuring we're keeping out certain growth regulators and things like that. But people aren't focusing on that. They're focusing on price and availability. And if those things go away, then we risk having people go back to the illicit market. And the illicit market is frankly a dangerous place for people to be purchasing their cannabis.
And it sounds like more expensive, which is I hadn't thought of, but that's yet another good argument for the legal market.
Yeah, and then, when you were talking about taxation overall, it can't be disentangled from the larger elements around it, but it does play such a key role. And I hear industry, saying we need to change the excise tax, and that will help them assuredly in some ways. But I think that they can't simply call for financial improvements to their situation without also having to answer some questions about the high THC that's there. And so I suspect what we might see long term is that there's a bit of a negotiation informally between the limitations on THC in some products and to some consumers and the changes in taxation policy. If we look at Germany, people under 21 in Germany are limited to cannabis products that are 10% THC maximum. And to be honest, I think that's actually a pretty good idea. I think it'd be, the horses left the barn potentially here in Canada, but it's not a bad policy. We know, as I said earlier, the risks around cannabis. For an adult like me, who's every once in a while having a little bit of cannabis, a very an infrequent consumer. It's very minimal risks, particularly as I tend not to be a smoker. So I'm not, using combusted products. But we do know that, high THC, as I said, particularly for young brains, but overall, it does have direct correlation with substance use disorder, although some of those measures don't take into account medical use, as you're aware. But we need to think about how we're actually approaching this product as a whole plant and as the end results that are coming out of a production process that is trying to keep businesses are trying to keep themselves afloat and government is trying to protect people's well-being.
Okay, and before we run out of time, I want to talk about a bot you're working on, but I just want to squeeze in one more thing before we get to the bot. So we've been talking about the smokables, maybe the THC levels getting a little too high, but edibles. There, many people have complained to us and others that the 10 milligram maximum on edibles is not doing it for them. It's not working. What's going on with edibles and the fact where we almost seem to be limitless the amount of THC you can put in a smokable, but the edible there seems to be a relatively low limit.
Yeah, and let's not forget, if you have a product that is considered a non-food edible, some of the mints or stuff that I've seen, or some, the oils, you can have, incredibly high amounts of THC. I forget the exact number right now. So I think there's a lot going on there. First, there are some people that do need high levels of THC in an edible. I started my career working with medical cannabis patients at the Women's Alliance for Medical Marijuana. And those people had lupus and cancer and HIV and a variety of things where they really needed relatively high doses of THC to get through the day. And I totally appreciate that. And even non-medical patients, there are people who've got a tolerance or other needs that have high levels of THC. But I think there's also an element here. If you're buying very high levels of THC from the illicit market, you're not always necessarily getting that. So you might think you need that 30 milligram edible, but actually you are only getting 10 milligrams. And there's a huge psychosomatic element to any drug's use, right? We come down to a lot of set and setting. What are you expecting from the drug? And so I think there's an element there. I would agree that I think the 10 milligram limit is problematic. I do like now to see that there's now multiple packaging allowed, multiple 10 milligram packaging allowed in there, because I think that does help negate some of the cost. We know that some of the highest cost elements of an edible is the packaging itself. The actual production cost on a gummy with 5 milligrams of THC is, a couple cents. And so if we can help bring that cost down, that'll bring over, I think, a lot of people from the illicit market, while we're still ensuring that those containers that they're in are child safe and child proof, and that we can do more education around protecting individuals. I know we've seen a spike, particularly in kids going to emergency departments since legalization. We don't know what products they're getting their hands on, whether that's illicit or licit. I'll tell you, my wife and I both struggle to open an edibles package, so I do suspect that some of those poisonings are potentially from.
I'm a pharmacist. I deal with child-proof containers every day, and I don't know what magic they put on those Ziploc slides, but they are not easy.
They are definitely complicated, and it's it's one of those things where it's like, credit to you, this is child-proof and adult-proof. That's good.
So, bot. We a little bit off camera, we talked about a bot. I really want to slide this in before we run out of time with you. So you were talking a little bit about a new project you are working on. I'm just going to leave it there and let you sort of introduce that to the folks.
Yeah, so, a lot of my work's been around cannabis education, and one of the big challenges is that people find most of the information out there problematic. As you mentioned earlier, it starts with sort of, here are the harms around cannabis. And even if the education materials do then transition to, and here's what you can do about it, which too few of them do, there's not a lot of resources, and we can't write every answer for every question that people might have out there. So I've just been fooling around on a cannabis education chatbot that is taught to employ the ideas of mindful consumption and benefit maximization as part of its response. And so it delivers information from that mindset of asking you about mindfulness. What are your intentions? Here's how to get the best possible experience and the safest experience. So I'm just fooling around with it now. I'm probably going to launch it in the next week or so. It's just, it's totally, I'm not a very techie person, but thanks to AI and some, a lot of YouTube videos and some guidance, I've got a functioning model. I was testing it last night. I sent the link to a couple friends, and it did say a couple things where I was like, whoa, okay, bot, you're a little bit off there. Let's change some of this. But otherwise, it's been doing pretty well. It asks you, like, if you ask it a question, it's really focused on your intention around your consumption and thinking about how you can have the best possible and safest experience around there. So I'm really excited for it. I think it's a new way to deliver cannabis education content, and hopefully something that people will find engaging and useful. And I am doing full on transparency. I do have the questions that people ask, and the response that the bot gives gets sent to me, so I can collect that data and see sort of and fine tune that information. But I'm also really interested, my contact info is on the website, and so people can respond to that as well. And it's just through my my consulting side hustle, Responsum Consulting, our website is very simple, but it's useful, and I'm sure I'll send you the link to make sure you can post it with the podcast there, and I'll be sending it out on LinkedIn in the next probably week or so.
Perfect. And yeah, by the time you're hearing this, listeners, the bot will be live. We will definitely have links at the bottom. Oh, and because everyone will ask, does the bot have a name? Do you have a cute name for it yet? The responsive bot?
Right now it's just called Cannabis Education Chatbot, but I have been thinking about that. It needs a better name. Something that people can refer to it. So I'm gonna. It's actually on my list of to do for today is to think of some cutesy names, and then if I can't think of anything, to ask AI to put forward a couple suggestions there.
That is fantastic, Daniel. This, as usual, has been really fascinating. I've enjoyed it all. Anything else I forgot to ask that you think we should get in before we run out of time?
No, I'll just say, you know what? Just remember the salad analogy next, the salad dressing analogy.
I really like that one. The vinegar on my arugula wouldn't be so good.
No,
actually, I really don't like
arugula.
The vinegar on my like baby spinach. Then, yeah, I don't really like arugula.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah,
it sounds good, but it never comes out the way I want. All right. Thank you very much, Daniel. Kirk, I'm sure you have thoughts, especially on instead of doing harm reduction, actually talking about benefits of cannabis. What did you think about that sort of mindset? The MCBM, Mindful Consumption Benefit Maximization.
Well, I share with him my usefulness in consuming cannabis as a youth. I also have consumed cannabis out of a tin can, an apple, a toilet paper roll, any which way we could find a way to put flour into something and inhale it. Been there, done that. So that made me smile when he talked about that. I think the marketplace has changed since I was a youthful consumer of cannabis. So I am all over this, Trevor. I think mindful consumption and the benefits of using cannabis is topical and hot. And I enjoyed the conversation. We have often discussed cannabis overdose. And yes, I always seem to lose the argument when I say, stop using the terminology overdose. Right? I lose that argument all the time. I thoroughly believe that people do not overdose on cannabis. I think they overuse THC. And I think we need to change the terminology. And I think Daniel Baer is on the same page as I am. We need to look at how much THC is being consumed.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, we won't rehash overdose, but I especially liked, well, you and I have talked before about our personal experience with some of these really high dose THC stuff, and neither of us were a big fan. But I also really liked him mentioning a few times and sort of coming up that under 21 in Germany, they have to be less than 10% THC. Like you said, in Canada, that horse may have left the barn, but I thought that was just an interesting thing that they're doing in other places. But yeah, the whole market, the whole cannabis market is tight margins. Like, there's not a lot of room for profit, and the belief amongst cannabis growers and sellers right now is basically the higher the THC they offer, the more profit they're going to make. True or not, I like the fact that Daniel's trying to convince people that might not be what they should be looking for, and I really liked his salad dressing analogy of, you wouldn't put just vinegar on your greens because it wouldn't taste as good as if you mix it with a few other things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The salad analogy is wonderful. It's also the coffee analogy is wonderful. I was on the computer today looking at posts and reading about cannabis, and one of our past guests, Kaylee Beaudry, posted on LinkedIn about how Alberta is making the most money off cannabis in Canada through taxation. And I responded to her, and I think what we have to do, and it's not just the medical field, because as a registered nurse, I speak as a nurse, but also as someone that has spent some time studying, researching, observing, looking at the rec market. And I sometimes wonder if the rec market is not doing itself a disservice. And I think we got to stop looking at cannabis as a substance of misuse. The government basically told us, the Trudeau government, that they were creating this law called the Cannabis Act, using the learning they got from tobacco and alcohol abuse. And there's no question, alcohol and tobacco has destroyed lives. There's no question about that. It's researched, it's documented, everybody agrees. Yet, 4 out of 5 doctors recommended Camel cigarettes or Chesterfield cigarettes back in the 50s. So we have learned, right? We have learned that tobacco is not recommended by doctors anymore. But for us to continue after 7 years, and yes, 7 years is not a long time, but we have to remember that cannabis has been part of societies for a millennium. And I think it's time that government starts reviewing the cost of cannabis to society. And is cannabis should we still consider cannabis a substance of misuse? Because really, the cost to society is little. There's very little money costing us as society because people have started consuming cannabis. The whole THC thing, yeah, come on, man. We don't need a spliff in recreational markets that high. We don't sell Everclear in Canada for a reason, right? As far as I know, we don't sell Everclear in Canada. Not in Manitoba.
Best of my knowledge, we don't. And for you Canadians, that's basically pure alcohol that you can buy in the U.S., but can't buy here. But even whether you care that cannabis is a substance of misuse or not, even from the business point of view, a few things that I thought was very interesting, talking about, it was sort of set up, the whole thing was set up with the Best Buy approach of selling weed versus a public health approach where you're trying to protect the public. And they don't mesh that well. Things need to be tweaked here because we know, and Daniel mentioned a couple times, even the cost to consumers has gone down since legalization. So legalization basically it's cheaper weed to consumers, but if the legal market fails, like the stores can't afford to pay their employees, the producers can't afford to pay their employees, because, and I'm simplifying it a bit, but because so much of the money is actually going to taxes, then we don't have a successful legal market anymore, and then we're going back to the bad old days of illegal weed, which there is far less control. So even if all you care about is the safety point of view, keeping a healthy marketplace is good, and one thing that might help with that is changing taxation.
Completely agree, but we're not going to change taxation until we educate and until we inform people. Nurses, doctors, the healthcare profession has to recognize that really cannabis is misunderstood, right? And I go back to the whole cannabis overdose or people having anxieties because they're consuming cannabis. And what people have to recognize is cannabis is but the plant and not the components, the different cannabinoids in the plant. There's so much more to understand. In the article, you talk about and compare alcohol. And we walk into a liquor store and we can buy creamed alcohols. We can find low alcohol beers. We can find high alcoholic beers. People got a variety of choices in a liquor mart. Cannabis is the same thing, but what's lacking is that alcohol is alcohol is alcohol is alcohol. Cannabis is not that way. Is a cannabis product is not the same as an alcohol product. There are so many more things within that product that need to be educated. So maybe using the analogy of the German model, maybe government should tax high THC products, because the high THC products are what's causing the anxiety, what's causing the paranoia possibly. A lot of people will say to me, Kirk, I don't do cannabis because it just puts me to sleep. And I say to them, well, it's not the cannabis putting you to sleep. It's the fact that you've maybe got an old product and the THC has converted to CBNs, or maybe you bought the wrong product. So I think the industry has to learn to educate. And the problem with that, Trevor, is, of course, we've got that Cannabis Act, which is very restrictive. However, if you choose to educate rather than promote cannabis, I think there's a way around the Cannabis Act. I think if companies learn to educate people on the cannabinoids, and if they use someone like a nurse or a pharmacist to help them, and maybe this is the appropriate time to refer people to our blog page, because if you go to our blog page, reefermed.ca, you'll find 6 public service announcements that we produced with the help of the cannabis industry, right? So we've produced education on cannabis to help people understand the product. Daniel Baer is completely on mark here. The problem is not cannabis. The problem is how people use cannabis. And the problem is that the industry needs to do things to create more money, therefore hefting up the THC, which is dangerous. And God, did I say that cannabis can be dangerous? I don't often say that. But high THC products are dangerous. I think I told you in one of my road trips, I found 1,000 milligram cookie in a rec shop. But that wasn't recreational cannabis. That was medicinal cannabis. I'm sorry, people, but there's no reason in my mind anybody should be swallowing Everclear by the ounce. And there's no reason why anybody should be swallowing 1,000 milligram cookie for recreation. So I think Daniel Baer's right on the mark.
For recreation. And absolutely. But we should say, because he mentioned a few times, some people, for medicinal reasons, do need higher doses of THC.
Correct.
So it's not that they shouldn't be available. 2 just little things that I really liked, because it comes up every so often about children ending up in the emergency room after consuming mom or dad's edibles, and that's, I'm not saying that's good. No one's having a good day when that happens. But Daniel made a really good point that I just hadn't thought of, is, do we know if that came from the legal or illegal market? Because the child-proof containers in the legal market are really good. Like, literally, if you've never opened one, even their literal Ziploc bags are hard to open. So, just thoughts on, what the kids got. We don't know. We're speculating. But, just the child-proof packaging in the legal market is very good. And
it's
the other is
proof.
because
it's
everyone's going to want to...
It's not...
It's everybody proof. They are hard to open. But the other is the chatbot we mentioned right at the end does have a name now. The chatbot is HERBy, and that is the Helpful Education Benefit-maximization tool. So HERBy, the chatbot, I played with it a little bit. It's kind of fun. We'll have links to it in the show notes.
I need to jump back to a comment you just made about there is a place for a 1,000 milligram cookie. But if I'm going to make a political comment, not in a rec shop. Now, let me qualify that. Let me qualify that statement. We know that Health Canada does not support the medical market very well. We know that it's very cumbersome for people to get their medicine through the online system. Therefore, they go to rec shops. So another thing government can consider, rather than tax the hell out of all cannabis products, taxed high THC products, but also allowed rec dispensaries to have a medical counter, so that if you are a medical user, you can access your weed easily from a medical counter that has the 1,000 milligram cookie there. But don't be buying no 1,000. Well, you can't. Well, actually, sorry, you can't buy it now in the legal rec market. You can't buy it, but it's available in Aboriginal communities, from my experience. So, Anyways, I think Daniel Bear's right on key with his harm reduction, the mindful consumption. I think that's in my elder years. I would like to think I'm more mindful with my consumption. I do consume most of my own medicinally grown, homegrown. So I'm a poor representative when it comes to going to a rec store. But anyways, I thought it was a good story, Trevor.
Yeah, no, I really liked it. Thank you again, Daniel. Like I said, we'll have. Look below in the show notes for things like links to the HERBy chatbot. And thanks, Daniel. That was great. I think this was another good one.
Check out the complete library of Reefer Madness episodes at reefermed.ca. And make sure to follow us on all the socials for bonus info on what Trevor and Kirk are up to.
This was great. We'll talk to you later. Okay, just stay on the line for a second. I'm going to hit the end of all the recordings. Pause, stop recording there, stop recording there. Yes, I really want to stop. And